Well, we'll get going. Hopefully it works out pretty well for you. It's a little bit cold, but as we fill up, things will warm up in here. I work a lot with growing crops. I am a field specialist with Ohio State. I do this kind of for a living right now. Most everybody that I know that's a livestock producer is sort of full or really full. We had a few opportunities last fall to get manure hauled, but when you reached about the middle of October, everything after that was hit and miss. Harvest was hit and miss. We thought we would get cover crops planted. That was all hit and miss. Had we known then, we would have flown the doggone things on because everybody thought fields would get fit and we could get cover crops established for our winter manure application rules. So it's been really tough. Eventually everybody's going to want to haul manure and do something with it. I just put an article in the corn newsletter this week that I think we can do a lot with putting manure on wheat for the hog guys if you choose to do that. But we're going to concentrate mostly today on some other things. We need to do the same thing with manure that we've been encouraging the commercial fertilizer people to do, and that's use the right product, right place, right time, right amount. For most of us, there's been a lot of talk about, we're going to have this technology that shows us whether there's a runoff issue in the fields, whether the fields are fit to accept manure. In all honesty, if you can get equipment on a field, you're going to apply. The heck with everything except the forecast. I understand that. But we want to do the best we can in most instances. I still want to drive home that in hog manure especially, about 50% of the value of the NP and K in hog manure is in that nitrogen. And if I can get a 2-to-1 ratio if I can have twice as much nitrogen in my hog sample as I do phosphorus, which is pretty common, then I can make a pretty good product to side dress fields with. But we also have sulfur in livestock manure, and that's a positive because, again, most of you who work with fertilizer dealerships know that we need sulfur added pretty frequently to our soils with a lack of acid rain. The other thing I point out on sulfur is that in Iowa, where I have 3 pounds in 1,000 gallons, a lot of the Iowa people say they have about 10, which gives them 3 times the opportunity for hydrogen sulfide buildup in the pits. So we just understand that high sulfur levels can bring us some additional trouble. But regardless, just know that you can do a soil test and a manure test and get similar types of information. That's a big thing we want to drive home with that. This is some data that we completed a few years ago. I just want to refresh a few memories. Everything from the center to the top is pre-emergent manure application and 28 application. Our control was incorporated 200 units of 28% nitrogen over 5 years for an average of about 142 bushel per acre. Everything down below are post-emergent plots. Our control was 200 units of 28% nitrogen, and we've got about 145 bushels per acre. And then what we compared that to was incorporated swine manure at 5,000 gallons per acre. I put them on the Dietrich sweep, so I put it in the ground about 3 inches. And we surface applied that swine manure here. We incorporated dairy manure at a 1/2 inch per acre, 13,500 gallons. It didn't have enough 28 in it, so we had to add about 60 units of nitrogen as 28. And then we surface applied that same dairy manure. When you bring them all across, and again, these post-emergent treatments are the same thing. When you bring them all across, the manure, when we don't have a compaction issue, was about 15 bushel better over a 5-year period of time, both in the pre-emergent and the post-emergent plots. A little bit more on the post plots. When we put that same manure on the surface, we dropped quite a bit. We were still within about 10 bushel per acre of the incorporated 200 units of 28, but we did lose quite a bit by the surface application of the manure each year. And the biggest thing we draw home from that is that when we leave manure on the surface, we're going to concede most of that nitrogen, unless we get a gentle rain to work it in. The other reason that really comes up, if you look at the more recent research from Lake Erie, they'll say, yes, the amount of phosphorus that enters Lake Erie dictates the size of the algae blooms, but the nitrogen that's going into Lake Erie seems to be dictating the toxicity of the nitrogen blooms. If that's true, then for the manure people, that's a double whammy, because we put out large amounts of P2O5 in the fall, and we put out large amounts of nitrogen in the fall both. And so do we with commercial fertilizer. When we're spreading MAP in the fall, we put a small amount of nitrogen out. But just understand, for those of us who work in a manure area, we have the potential to do a lot better with our manure. And as we encourage people to move manure greater distances, when we tell them that you need to go out a couple miles, if we can capture the nitrogen value of that manure, then we've got a lot better chance of paying for the cost of moving that manure. Those are the arguments that I would put forth. Uh-oh. This is 4 years of the Sidedress that we do with Harrods in Darke County. If you look over the 4 years that we did drag hose plots with those guys, they're coming up at 18 bushels or 14.8 bushels better. When they did not put Sidedress nitrogen on, they figured their increase in the value of corn over those years, they estimated that they were about $125 per acre better. Now, they don't do this for every acre of corn, but they just try to set aside 50 acres not far from each of their finishing plots or each of their finishing buildings to make this happen. I think I blew through something here. Oops, okay. When they do harvest, this is what harvest looks like at the time. Weed control was really good. Corn stands really well for us. We just don't have a lot of negatives with trying to use livestock manure with corn. In the old days, you had pigweed and the weeds associated with manure. And we have Jeff Stackler coming in here in about an hour, and Jeff will talk about weeds associated with manure and weed control. The other thing that the Harrods really drive home is the balance. When you look at their rotation, they figure 200 bushel corn and 60 bushel beans. Using the old Tri-State Fertility Guide, the corn crop will remove 74 pounds of P2O and 54 pounds of K2O when you harvest 200 bushel. The soybeans the following year will take out 48 pounds of P2O5 and 84 pounds of K2O the following year. When you look at that total removal for 2 years, you're taking out 122 pounds of P2O5 and 138 pounds of K2O with the crop removal. When they go in there every other year with 6,500 gallons of hog manure, they're providing 221 units of nitrogen to sidedress their corn, 117 pounds of P2O5, 143 of K2O, for basically just about a break even. So they've got a system in place where their P2O5 levels are not going to rise if they use manure at these types of rates. 6,500 gallons doesn't appeal to most commercial manure applicators. They'd like to do a lot more volume. You know, they like to do 1,800, 2,000 gallons per minute type thing. And you can do that, but you got to go with wider equipment. That's why we run 12-row toolbars. We also continue to flatten corn. Whoops. With the drag hose. Basically what we do is at V1, V2, V3, V4, and V5, we flatten corn with a drag hose. And then we turn right around and we flatten it again on the way back so that this corn gets hit twice. And the reason being, we're trying to find the sweet spot at what point we don't think we can drag hose corn any further. When it gets this tall, it's too tall. When we snap it off, you see how that corn plant has clearly been snapped off. You see this big pile of corn plants here that have been drugged and deposited in one spot. When it gets that far, it's too far with a 6-inch hose. Now, is it too far with a 4.5-inch hose? We don't know. We're building a little 4.5-inch drag hose this winter. Roger Rader up in Hancock County is going to put some ends on it for me. And this spring, we're going to start on corn again with this drag hose system, only we're going to use a smaller hose than the 6 that we've been pulling. And then I had an applicator ask me the other day if we could do some with a 7-inch hose, because he's going to go from a 6 to a 7-inch hose in his operation. But it takes a mighty, mighty tractor to pull a 7. A 6 is plenty for most of us, too. Regardless of that, based on 5 years of data, and we're going to shut this one down, but based on 5 years of data, coming across the top with the yields where no hose was drugged, and then looking at V1 to V5 stages coming across here, basically 170, 170, about 170, just above 170. And here's where we begin to break, 167 at V4. And then also our stand starts to drop as well. The stand was not impacted up till this point. But see where here we are at V5, 122.9. So we broke about 50 bushel between V4 and V5. So we know we can't be dragging V5 corn with a 6-inch drag hose. Could I drag this with a 4.5-inch hose? I don't know, in a year or two I'll know. But with a 6, we got to stop right there where we're at. So we didn't like dragging V4 corn. At least I didn't like it. But almost all the plots we did this year were V4 because it was wet. We couldn't get in at V2 and V3. So it was just the way it goes. Just so we're all on the same page, this first leaf that comes out of the ground is shaped like your thumb. That's the V1 leaf. V2 has a collar right here. This leaf here has a true collar. See where it grips that plant like you would grip a flagpole? So this is V3 corn. So we could actually go a little taller. This leaf could be a collar here and come up with V4. But V3 corn, you can see 5 leaves on a plant. These are the toolbars. We showed these last year. We got to run pretty hard with them this year. This is the Bazooka FarmStar toolbar that we have to work with. This is a 12-row applicator. This is the Dietrich unit that Baumbauer put together for us. It's a 12-row applicator, and this is a Zoski that Southwest Automation put together for us. So it's out of Darke County. We did quite a few plots this year. We targeted 4 farms in Darke County. We only got 2 done down there. We didn't get our Argaze plots done, but we got quite a few done in Crawford County, quite a few done in Northwest Ohio. And essentially we rented tractors to put on each of the toolbars to keep things simple. Thanks to Ohio Corn Growers for putting those together. But here's an example of us basically just running with our 12-row applicator. This is Harrods. The corn is a little taller than we like. It's already up to V4. But essentially we're just running through the corn and we're laying down some manure. If we can get it covered up, the yields can be pretty doggone good. If we leave it on top of the ground, we don't. So we've battled a little bit on coverage. We're trying to find that happy medium between digging up enough dirt to get good coverage and not so much dirt that the drag hose is going to cause more damage by scouring the field, giving us trouble like that. So usually this absorbs pretty rapidly in here, and we're in pretty good shape. The other one that we've tried is to play with different ways of making this work. Harrod Farms for many years has planted their corn at an angle to make the drag hose work. So if you've ever worked with a drag hose person, if he was going to drag hose this field, he would lay his hose from that far corner down there to this corner. Then the drag hose guy would simply put manure on this half of this field. Then he would spin around and put manure on this half of the field. And they have to do that because the turns and the distance has to get shorter with every turn with the drag hose. So basically they'll take any square or rectangle and break it into 2 triangles to do their manure application. This guy wanted to try a straight field of corn. So we had Fry Brothers from up in Williams County. They thought they had a system that would work. So basically all they do is they put a hose humper here on the end of the field. You can see where we've made turns before. And we really didn't have a whole lot of tractor here, so we have to make the 3-point turn, which puts about a 5x rate of manure on the end probably. But once he gets that turn made, then Dave's going to come in here and he's going to hook onto that hose for us and anchor it. This worked pretty well for quarter-mile fields. It's harder on the hose, and most commercial applicators would probably prefer not to do this, and I don't certainly blame them for it. But it shows it does work. And this was a way that the field could be planted straight and the commercial applicator could still make his hose system work the way he wanted it to work. So Dave's going to hook in there, turn them loose, and you can see we skipped 12 rows of corn here for test control. They had 3 of those. This is dairy manure at about 11,000 gallons per acre. He put 180 units of anhydrous in the skipped rows, And basically he got 25 tons of silage on the anhydrous, and we got 24.5 with the manure. So most dairy farmers are sitting on plenty of poop that time of year. He was pretty happy with it. A better system that I think than to anchor that on the end would be put that hose humper right here in the center of the field. And as this guy goes by, the hose humper would simply hook in and make sure that the hose stays behind the tractor all the way down. We did that with a couple fields, and it doesn't take near as much tractor to do it that way. So if you ever want to sit down, we can draw it up on paper, but I think that's a superior system there. And you can see the hose being pulled down here, going down to where the hose humper sets, and then we're coming back. This field was really sandy, and the only way that hose would work is if we had cereal rye stubble for that hose to be pulled across. So it was really important to make that work out like that. The other thing that we got into more of this year was pre-emergent manure application. This is the Zoski being run in Crawford County. They were out pretty far from the source of manure, so they're kind of taking their time, trying to get about 7,000 gallons per acre down ahead of time. Now remember, 28,154 is an acre inch, so we're putting about a 1/4 inch of manure, 7,000 gallons, down pre-plant. And the field's in pretty good shape. And he went ahead and did these at a 45-degree angle like the drag hose guys like to do. And then the farmer came back and lightly worked the field and planted corn a couple weeks later. And then he used a half rate of nitrogen for his corn crop. And all the tissue tests indicated he had plenty of nitrogen. He thought this was something that they want to do more of in his area. Fairly tight soils, just an opportunity to try something different. So pre-emergent applications of manure ahead of corn. The only thing we ever got to guard against on that is getting too much salt in the zone where the corn is planted. Remember, K2O, P2O5 are both salts. If you get those right in with the seed, you will have problems with germination. But the fact that they got it down there, they worked the field for a little bit of disturbance, and they came in there and put their corn in, seemed to be fine with them. But I just know that there have been stories of guys who put large amounts of manure out, disc it in, seeded beans, and not got stuff to come up the first time out. So we've got to be careful about too much salt too close to the seed. This is still popular. We still have a lot of people. This is really popular with our commercial applicators to have a field planted and just come in and put manure on top, either the day after it's been planted or up to V3 or 4. You can always see those tractor tracks. It slows the corn down where the tractor ran over it, but where the hose was and where the manure is, it never seems to be much of an issue here. I only throw that out because the conditions of the field are so important. When you go across fields with drag hoses that have just been planted, you can move the dirt, you can scour it, you can bury corn that's just been planted a lot deeper than the original 1 3/4 that you were aiming for. So just understand that field conditions are pretty good. No-till is really good. Stale seed beds, cover crops killed late are supportive of the hose. But just understand that it doesn't always work for everybody. I've got a few of those pictures. This is a guy that planted a field of corn. You can see it's a very soft, loamy soil. A lot of loose dirt in here. And he's broadcasting, coming across with an applicator. This is another one where you can see where we have a pretty good corn stand, and you can see where we are flattening more corn and we are burying more corn than we want to. In the end, the yield actually worked out pretty good for him. But again, he knows next year that if we try this, he's got to have a firmer seed bed for this hose to drag across to be successful. This is an example of a person surface applying across the field with a drag hose on a pretty loamy, soft dirt. You can see both the scouring of the hose over there, and you can see the movement of the liquid off of this area. Now, corn plants will stretch out pretty far to find their nitrogen, But this is just an example where he drug a lot of dirt and a lot of liquid off the high spots of the field and deposited them in the lower spots of the field. So not what we're really after as far as some sort of a balance to our manure application. To make that drag hose work, the soil has to be firm enough to support the hose. No-till, cover crops, stale seed beds all seem to work pretty good. Even a good heavy rain after the field has been worked and to settle it goes a long, long way. Crop needs to be at the proper stage, just planted to up to V4 we feel pretty comfortable with. Plant the crop to make that drag hose work if at all possible. Again, the drag hose guys and the people who are working with these fields need to talk a lot early on. You cannot have the drag hose guy show up and surprise him or her with a straight planted field where they thought there'd be a 45, or ask them to incorporate where they're expecting they're just going to splash going across the top. So we just need to cooperate with each other and everybody get on the same page. And again, it's not every acre. If a farmer farms several thousand acres and he plants a couple thousand of corn, we're only talking about whatever's sufficient for their manure application that season. As we encourage people to get farther and farther away from home with manure, we really are looking a lot at frac tanks at times. The dairies up in northwest Ohio have really been using the frac tanks and tankers to move manure greater distances. As they revise the 590 standards, which are going to come out, it's likely they're going to ratchet down the amount of P2O5s can be in a field before manure is banned or any fertilizer is banned. This is just an example of Fry Brothers with their frac tank up in Williams County. They've got theirs hooked up to a semi, and so what they essentially do, they can empty 2 trucks at one time. They siphon off the bottom, dump it into this frac tank, and then they drag hose out of the frac tank. The only reason I point out a couple things: one, they can empty 2 trucks at a time, goes pretty fast. Because they load and unload their semis from the bottom, they're usually not dealing with much in the way of foam, which takes away from volume. And you can see we have additional semis, and they'll get as many as a dozen to 15 semis running in a pack to supply manure. And usually they roughly figure about a semi per mile that they're out. So if they're 10 miles away from the dairy, then they'll need 10 trucks at least. And then the other thing they try to do is try to have more than one loading station at the dairy so that semis are never waiting on each other. When this guy's sitting still at $125 an hour or whatever we're paying him to be pumping poop that day, that's costing us money. So we want to unload these and load these as quickly as possible. You can see we're in a wheat stubble field, so we're out in the middle of the summertime trying to do a good job. Again, I can do it pretty quickly. It's always helpful to have that type of technology working for you. Minnesota got a hold of us last year, wanted to do some manure plots. North Carolina called yesterday. I told them if they want somebody to come down and help them, I'd be good for the coldest 6 months every winter. I'd go down there in a heartbeat. This is anhydrous ammonia, this dark area right here. This area here with these strips in it is swine manure. This next one is 28. This next one, they had no sidedress nitrogen here, here, and here. Here's another one with no sidedress nitrogen. There's 28%. There's 28%. There's swine manure. What's these streaks doing in this swine manure here? Commercial guys in the back. Did they plug a nozzle or two? That's exactly what they did. Yep, they unplugged it right here and kept on going. So despite all that, the data that they gathered the first year was their anhydrous ammonia did 208 bushel per acre, their 28 did 204, and that difference of 4 to 5 bushel is exactly what you find in all the research literature. Anhydrous is just better than 28%, always has been as a nitrogen source for corn. But 28 is a little safer, a little more flexible. That's one of the reasons we go that route. Their control did 140. In Ohio, a control like that would do about 60 is what I usually average. It just shows you what they had a good year to work with. But look what their drag hose manure did, 204. So despite the plugged nozzles that you can see here And the plugged nozzles you can see here, they still did 204 with their manure. So they're sold. They're pretty excited about trying that in the upcoming years. Now, under the areas of new research and things not to do, this is one not to do. One of our commercial applicators asked, what if you plant the corn and then we just come across at an angle with our equipment? Now, if they were going to splash it on top of the ground, they would have been okay. But we wanted to try this Dietrich sweep and come across corn at an angle just to see what would be the end effect of that. The reason we incorporated it is, I believe, the incorporation of manure will have to be a requirement at some point. Not that I want it that way. I'm just saying, we represent 2% of the voting population. I think it'll be a requirement at some point with all fertilizer, probably in Ohio. Maybe not in my lifetime, but it's coming. So anyhow, the point we're making here is that we knocked the population from 32,000 to 23,000 doing this, and we knocked the yield from 211 to the upper or the mid 170s doing this. So no, you guys shouldn't do this. But we're thinking that if we repeat this and we either go through it sooner, or maybe we start and use the rotary equipment that everybody has, the front rotary coder, then put the boot of manure right on top of the tilled ground, maybe lift the closing wheels off. Maybe this would work on newly planted corn quite well. If that happened, then the commercial applicators would be happy because they do their corn at an angle. The regular farmers would be happy because they plant their corn straight. So there might be a marriage that's possible here. But first year out, it wasn't a marriage, not the first time. Basically, it looks like check row corn. If you've ever been out in Iowa and looked at old check row corn from many years ago, that's exactly what this field looked like. Everywhere you stood, you could see a row in any direction of some sort. The other thing, though, is I asked the precision planting people at Ohio State, John Fulton and his whole crowd, could they someday leave us 45-degree or leave us strips across these fields for those cultivators of manure application to run? Again, this is corn planted up and down, and their planter changes the type of corn based on whatever they programmed in. I said, could you leave me every 30 or 60 inches, could you leave me a 6-inch wide strip and still get your 35,000 plant population you want? They said, that's no problem at all. So it's conceivable that the day would come where you would still plant the corn the way you regularly would, but your planter would skip a spot for that manure applicator to come through. So there's lots of potential. It's going to take a younger person than me to work with that, but there's lots of potential for it, I believe. The other thing we tried this past year is flattening corn. Or wheat. No, soybeans. Those are soybeans. We wanted to see what the effect of flattening beans would be. We want to see eventually, can a drag hose be used across soybeans? The answer seems to be yes. That V1, V3, and V5, you could not tell that we went across these beans twice in some instances with these drag hoses. Maybe a little bit where the tractor tracks were. At V7, we snapped them all off. The literature said V4 was about the limit you want to go, and that's probably not far off V5 probably. But if you look at V7, you see that crack right there on that plant? And you see that right there and right there. They grow sideways, and then they grew up. Now, they did yield pretty well, but that's only because we came through probably the best August we've ever had for growing soybeans in some of these areas. If it had been a drought year, it would never have produced like that, I'm sure. Last thing that we were doing some new research on, we did fall strip tillage. We're going to plant into these rows in the spring, see if we get any type of a yield boost. So every row has got 2 rates of hog manure or dairy manure on them. And then we'll have some untreated ones too, and we're going to just see if any type of fall strip application of manure would help us if we plant onto those in the spring. That's all we're trying to do with this plot. What's our goal? We just have to get our manure usage caught up with modern agriculture, I think. We've gone to liquid systems. We're able to move volumes much faster than before, but we've got to integrate it into the current systems that we're using for production. All right, it has to fit for people to want to use it, especially if livestock guys are trying to talk their neighbors into using crops. Social media, I try to put almost all my stuff on Ohio State Environmental and Manure Management Facebook page. Feel welcome to join up. I'm up to 1,852 people as of last night. So we're going that. New manure regulations, we have Laura, the Farm Bureau lady is speaking right before lunchtime today. But when the governor was looking at declaring watersheds distressed, that was the group. That's just Putnam County. This would be Hancock County. This is where we're at today, right about here. They didn't declare anything distressed, but don't think that that's nothing more than a honeymoon right now on that. With that, I'm done.